You talk to America's farmers, they'll tell you these are tough times. A combination of high operating costs, low commodity prices, and lost markets has had devastating repercussions on the agriculture industry and the communities built around it.
Oh, good evening to you. We begin tonight with hundreds of struggling Arkansas farmers pleading for emergency federal funding amid a farm economy crisis.
Now, I've never been as worried as I am now about whether or not my kids and grandkids will be able to carry on.
He said, I love you, Mr. Trump. I need to see the fruit of your love.
5 of my customers have committed. That's how serious that this is.
And what it costs for us to farm is astronomical now.
I farm with paid-for equipment. All my tractors are 50 years old, and I can't hardly make this deal work. I think the tariffs are the ice cream on the cake of a perfect storm.
After a horrible year last year where most farmers in Arkansas Delta lost money, this year's going to be worse.
John Deere's tractor is kind of the genesis of this. They started putting in their terms of service contracts saying that once you buy their tractor, you can only get it serviced by one of their authorized dealers. And that means that at haying season, all these tractors blitzed out, 1-year make and model, all blitzed out, and nobody could cut their hay. And, you know, farmers have a suicide rate 3.5 times higher than the general population.
The farming economy in Arkansas is entering a phase of intense stress as the cost of Greenway and environmentally compliant equipment climbs beyond the reach of many producers. What was once promoted as a manageable transition toward more sustainable practices has become a financial wall that farmers simply cannot climb. At the center of the crisis is the rising price of specialized machinery, much of it tied to proprietary systems and restrictive servicing models. As costs surge and access narrows, frustration has erupted across rural Arkansas, pushing political leadership into visible agitation and alarm. For farmers in Arkansas, Greenway equipment is no longer optional. Environmental standards, efficiency targets, and evolving market expectations increasingly require machinery that meets specific emissions and sustainability benchmarks. These requirements affect everything from planting and harvesting to irrigation and soil management. While the goals of sustainability are widely understood and often supported, the path toward compliance has become painfully expensive. Equipment prices have soared, financing options have tightened, and maintenance costs continue to rise, leaving many producers trapped between regulation and insolvency. The reliance on John Deere machinery has amplified the pressure. For decades, farmers in Arkansas built their operations around equipment ecosystems that promised reliability, service access, and long-term value. That relationship is now strained. New Greenway-compatible models come with price tags far beyond what small and mid-sized farms can absorb. Even used equipment has become scarce or inflated in price as demand concentrates on fewer compliant options. The promise that innovation would lower costs over time has not materialized for those working the land. Proprietary technology has become a major source of resentment. Modern equipment increasingly depends on software, sensors, and digital locks that limit independent repair and modification. Farmers accustomed to maintaining their own machinery now face mandatory dealer servicing and costly software updates. In Arkansas, where distances are long and margins thin, these restrictions translate into higher downtime and unexpected expenses. The sense of losing control over essential tools has fueled anger and fear across farming communities. The financial consequences are immediate and severe. Operating loans that once covered seasonal expenses now must stretch to accommodate massive capital investments. Lenders, wary of agricultural volatility, are imposing stricter terms or declining applications altogether. Farmers unable to secure financing face impossible choices: delay compliance and risk penalties, take on unsustainable debt, or exit farming entirely. Each option carries consequences that ripple through families and communities. The governor of Arkansas has responded with visible intensity, reflecting the scale of distress reaching the state's leadership. Public remarks have grown sharper, expressing outrage at the gap between policy expectations and economic reality. Emergency discussions with agricultural groups underscore a recognition that the situation is spiraling. The emotional tone reflects not just political pressure but an acknowledgement that the farming backbone of Arkansas is under threat from forces it cannot easily resist. Rural communities are already feeling the effects. Equipment dealers see reduced sales volume as farmers postpone purchases indefinitely. Repair shops struggle with limited access to parts and diagnostics. Local businesses dependent on farm income report declining activity as households cut spending. school districts, and local governments, reliant on agricultural tax bases, face budget uncertainty. What begins as an equipment affordability issue quickly becomes a broader economic contraction. The Greenway transition was marketed as an opportunity for long-term resilience, yet for many in Arkansas it feels like a trap. Compliance costs arrive immediately, while benefits remain distant or theoretical. Environmental responsibility, once framed as a shared goal, now feels imposed without adequate support. Farmers express frustration that sustainability expectations are not matched by affordability or flexibility, creating resentment toward both manufacturers and policymakers. The role of the United States looms large in the background. National standards influence equipment requirements, while federal incentives often fail to cover real-world costs. Application processes are complex, funding is limited, and timing rarely aligns with planting cycles. Arkansas farmers find themselves competing with larger operations across the country for assistance, often losing out due to scale rather than need. This imbalance deepens the sense that small producers are being left behind. Generational tension is growing as well. Older farmers who built their operations around mechanical simplicity struggle to adapt to digital complexity and rising costs. Younger farmers, often carrying student debt and startup loans, face even higher barriers to entry. The idea of passing farms down through families becomes increasingly uncertain as equipment costs alone threaten viability. The cultural continuity of farming in Arkansas is at risk. Anger is not directed at sustainability itself but at the structure of its implementation. Farmers understand environmental pressures and market shifts, yet they question why the burden falls so heavily on those least able to absorb it. The concentration of pricing power within a small number of manufacturers intensifies this frustration. When alternatives are limited and switching costs are high, farmers feel trapped in a system that extracts value without offering relief. As tensions rise, the governor of Arkansas confronts a narrowing set of options, challenging manufacturers risks economic retaliation and legal complexity, expanding state assistance strains already limited budgets. Appealing for broader federal intervention from the United States introduces uncertainty and delay. Each path carries political and economic risk, yet inaction threatens collapse. The visible frustration from leadership mirrors the desperation spreading across the countryside. The crisis has also sparked renewed debate about right to repair, competition, and fairness within agricultural markets. Farmers argue that affordability cannot improve without greater autonomy and transparency. Without structural change, Greenway compliance will remain a privilege rather than a standard, accelerating consolidation and pushing small farms out of existence. Arkansas stands at a critical moment where decisions made now will shape who can farm and who cannot. What is unfolding is not simply a dispute over equipment pricing, but a confrontation with the future of agriculture itself. The inability of farmers to afford Greenway equipment exposes a disconnect between ambition and reality. As anger boils over and patience wears thin, Arkansas faces the risk of losing not just farms but the people, knowledge, and communities that sustain them. The intensity of the response from leadership signals an understanding that the crisis is no longer manageable at the margins. It demands a reckoning with how sustainability, affordability, and fairness intersect within the evolving agricultural economy of the United States. The fallout from unaffordable Greenway equipment in Arkansas continues to widen, moving beyond farm balance sheets and into the core structure of the rural economy. What initially surfaced as frustration over machinery pricing has evolved into a systemic crisis that exposes deep imbalances between technological mandates, corporate control, and the lived reality of farming in the United States. As pressure builds, the emotional volatility seen at the state level reflects a broader realization that incremental fixes will no longer be enough. Farmers across Arkansas increasingly describe the situation as a loss of agency. Decisions that once belonged to producers, such as when to upgrade equipment, how to repair it, or how long to operate a machine, are now dictated by external forces. Greenway compliance schedules, software limitations, and dealer-controlled servicing remove flexibility that farmers historically relied upon to survive difficult years. In a profession already defined by uncertainty, the erosion of control feels especially destabilizing. The economics of Greenway equipment deepen the divide between large and small operations. Larger farms, often backed by stronger credit access and economies of scale, can absorb higher upfront costs and spread them over extensive acreage. Smaller farms in Arkansas lack this cushion. When equipment prices rise into six-figure territory, compliance becomes a binary outcome rather than a gradual transition. Either a farm can afford to modernize immediately, or it falls behind and risks exclusion from markets and programs tied to sustainability standards. This dynamic accelerates consolidation at an alarming pace. As smaller farms exit, land is absorbed by larger entities, reshaping ownership patterns across the state. While consolidation may improve efficiency on paper, it hollows out rural communities. Fewer independent farms mean fewer families, fewer local leaders, and less economic diversity. Towns that once thrived on a mosaic of producers now depend on a narrow base, increasing vulnerability to future shocks. Equipment dependency also alters labor dynamics. Modern Greenway machinery often requires specialized training and digital literacy, reducing opportunities for traditional farm labor. Jobs that once provided entry points into agriculture are disappearing, replaced by highly technical roles that are scarce in rural Arkansas. This shift limits workforce development and reinforces migration away from farming regions, further draining community vitality. Environmental goals remain central to the debate, yet many farmers feel they are being pursued without sufficient regard for feasibility. Sustainable practices are widely valued, especially among those who depend on the land for their livelihood. However, when compliance is tied to prohibitively expensive equipment, sustainability begins to resemble exclusion rather than stewardship. Farmers question whether environmental progress should come at the cost of eliminating the very people who care for the land. Trust between farmers and institutions continues to erode. Manufacturers are viewed as prioritizing profit and control over partnership. Policymakers are seen as detached from on-the-ground realities. Even lenders, once steady allies, are perceived as increasingly risk-averse and transactional. This breakdown in trust compounds stress and fuels anger, creating an environment where cooperation becomes harder precisely when it is most needed. The psychological toll of this crisis is growing heavier. Farmers in Arkansas describe sleeplessness, anxiety, and a sense of failure, even when they have done everything traditionally considered responsible. The inability to afford required equipment is internalized as personal inadequacy, despite being rooted in structural conditions. Rural mental health resources remain limited, leaving many to cope in isolation. The visible emotional strain at the state level mirrors countless unseen struggles across farm households. Supply chains are also affected. Reduced equipment purchases slow innovation feedback loops, while declining farm numbers reduce demand for inputs and services. Transport operators, parts suppliers, and service technicians all feel the contraction. The interconnected nature of agriculture means that a bottleneck in equipment affordability reverberates through the entire system, weakening resilience across sectors. The United States faces a broader strategic concern as well. Agricultural sustainability goals depend on widespread participation, not selective compliance, if only. The largest operations can afford Greenway transitions. National objectives risk becoming concentrated and fragile. Diverse, distributed farming systems have historically provided stability against shocks. Undermining that diversity for the sake of rapid technological rollout introduces new vulnerabilities. Debates over right to repair gain urgency in this context. Farmers argue that the ability to fix and modify equipment is not merely a convenience but a survival mechanism. Restrictive repair practices inflate costs and extend downtime, magnifying losses during critical seasons. In Arkansas, where timing can determine success or failure, delayed repairs translate directly into lost income. Calls for reform grow louder as farmers seek to reclaim basic autonomy. State-level intervention faces real constraints. Budgets are limited, and subsidies alone cannot offset structural pricing power held by manufacturers. Negotiations require leverage that individual states often lack. Appeals to federal authorities in the United States introduce complexity and delay, while farmers need immediate relief. The gap between urgency and capacity fuels frustration and sharpens rhetoric. Education and adaptation programs offer partial hope but remain insufficient. Training farmers to use advanced equipment does not solve the affordability problem. Transitioning to alternative crops or practices requires capital and time that many do not have. Without coordinated investment and policy alignment, these initiatives risk becoming symbolic rather than transformative. Cultural identity is also at stake. Farming in Arkansas is not only an economic activity but a way of life tied to heritage, land, and community. The forced exit of farmers due to equipment costs represents a loss that cannot be measured solely in dollars. Traditions fade, local knowledge disappears, and the connection between people and place weakens. This erosion carries long-term consequences for rural cohesion and national agricultural identity. the intensity of reaction from leadership reflects an understanding that the crisis challenges foundational assumptions about progress. Technological advancement was supposed to empower farmers, not marginalize them. Sustainability was meant to ensure continuity, not accelerate displacement. The disconnect between intention and outcome now demands reckoning. As pressure mounts, Arkansas stands at a crossroads. Continuing along the current path risks transforming farming into an exclusive enterprise accessible only to those with substantial capital. Redirecting course requires confronting corporate concentration, rethinking compliance timelines, and aligning environmental goals with economic reality. None of these steps are simple, yet inaction carries its own cost. What is unfolding reveals a deeper question about the future of agriculture in the United States. Who will be able to farm, under what conditions, and at what cost? The Greenway equipment crisis in Arkansas exposes how quickly noble objectives can become instruments of exclusion when affordability is ignored. The anger, panic, and emotional strain visible today are signals of a system under extreme pressure. If solutions fail to emerge, the outcome will not be a quiet adjustment but a profound transformation marked by loss. Farms will disappear, communities will shrink, and the agricultural landscape will consolidate into fewer hands. The urgency expressed at the state level reflects a recognition that this is not a distant threat but a present reality. The choices made now will determine whether sustainability becomes a shared achievement or a dividing line that reshapes farming in Arkansas for generations to come.